And
Blizzard
warnings really starting to show up.
The snowstorm arrived faster than anyone expected. Darren had taken what was supposed to be a quick delivery job, a last-minute run through a rural stretch of back roads before the worst of the weather hit. The dispatcher had promised it would be easy. Drop off the package, turn around, and head home before the snow became a problem. But now, as he sat in his truck on an unmarked road, the snow piling up on his windshield, he realized he had made a mistake. The storm was relentless, the wind howling as if the earth itself was screaming. His GPS had died 15 minutes ago, his phone showed no signal, and his truck refused to start. The engine cranked, sputtered, and fell silent each time he tried. He stared at the endless white outside, his breath fogging up the windows. That's when he first noticed it. A figure, a shadow in the snowstorm, just at the edge of his vision. He froze, squinting to make out the shape. It was faint, barely visible through the swirling snow, but it was moving. His first thought was relief. Maybe someone could help him. He reached for his flashlight, fumbling with the cold metal, as he rolled down the driver's side window slightly. "Hey!" he called out, his voice disappearing into the storm. The figure stopped. Darren waved the flashlight, shining it in the figure's direction, but the beam barely cut through the thick snow. When he looked again, the shadow was gone. A chill ran down his spine, one that had nothing to do with the freezing temperature. He pulled the window shut and locked the doors. "This storm's just messing with me," he muttered, trying to reassure himself. But the feeling of unease clung to him. As minutes turned into an hour, the wind seemed to grow louder, more insistent. The snow piled higher against the truck, burying the tires. Darren wrapped himself in his jacket, rubbing his hands together for warmth. The radio was useless, spitting static no matter how much he adjusted the dial. And then he heard it, a faint tapping. It was soft at first, almost like the wind brushing against the truck's frame, but it grew louder, rhythmic. Tap, tap, tap. It was coming from the back window. Darren's blood ran cold. He slowly turned his head, heart pounding so loudly he was sure it would drown out the sound. Through the frosted glass of the rear window, he could just make out a dark smudge, something pressed against the glass. He scrambled for his flashlight again, his fingers trembling as he clicked it on. He turned in his seat and shone the light toward the back window. There was nothing there. The tapping stopped. He let out a shaky breath, his pulse racing. Maybe the snow had shifted, he thought. Maybe a branch had fallen. He tried to calm himself, but every nerve in his body screamed that something wasn't right. Then the tapping started again, this time on the passenger side window. Darren whipped his head around, the flashlight trembling in his hand as he aimed it at the window. Again, there was nothing. But the snow outside the truck seemed disturbed, faint impressions in the white powder leading toward the front of the vehicle. He gripped the flashlight tighter, his breath hitching. Slowly, he reached for the door lock, double-checking that it was secure. The storm's howl seemed almost deafening now, like it was alive, surrounding him. The truck rocked slightly. Darren froze, his eyes darting to the rearview mirror. Something heavy had landed on the bed of the truck. He couldn't see it, but he could feel the weight shift. The entire truck creaked under the strain. He didn't dare move. His hands gripped the steering wheel as if it could anchor him to safety. The rocking stopped, replaced by the faint sound of movement, something crawling along the roof. The flashlight slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud. Darren swore under his breath, the sound barely audible over the storm. Slowly, he leaned down to retrieve it, his fingers brushing against the cold metal. The roof groaned above him. And then something hit the windshield, a loud, wet smack. Darren jerked upright, staring in horror as a red smear spread across the glass. It wasn't snow. It was thick, dark and viscous, trailing down in uneven streaks. Panic surged through him. He twisted the key in the ignition again, desperate to start the truck. The engine whined but refused to turn over. Another smack hit the windshield, followed by a deep, guttural sound, almost like a growl, but distorted, as if the storm itself was making the noise. Darren didn't wait to find out what it was. He grabbed his phone, even though he knew it had no signal, and yanked open the driver's side door. The wind hit him like a wall, nearly knocking him off his feet as he stumbled into the snow. He didn't look back. He couldn't. He ran, his boots crunching through the snow, the flashlight beam bouncing wildly ahead of him. The growling followed, growing louder, closer. The snow seemed to pull at him, dragging him down with each step. He turned his head briefly just once and caught a glimpse of something. A shape, tall and impossibly thin, its arms too long, its movements jerky and unnatural. He screamed, the sound lost in the storm, and kept running. The last thing he saw before the white consumed him completely was the faint outline of a building in the distance, a chance at salvation, or something worse. And then the storm swallowed him whole. The train tracks stretched endlessly through the white wilderness, disappearing into the blinding storm. Adam tightened his scarf, the icy wind slicing through the gaps in his winter gear. He shouldn't have been out here. No one should. But the sound, the metallic screech, had yanked him from the warmth of the station and into the teeth of the blizzard. It had been hours since the last train passed through, or so the station master claimed. "Tracks are frozen solid," the old man had muttered, sipping his coffee. "No trains coming until this storm clears." But Adam swore he'd heard it, the unmistakable sound of wheels grinding against metal. And then there were the footprints. They started just beyond the station, leading onto the tracks. A single set, partially obscured by the relentless snow, but fresh enough to be noticed. "Hey!" Adam had called, his voice swallowed by the wind. No answer, just the echo of his own voice, bouncing off the skeletal trees lining the tracks. Against his better judgment, he had followed. Now, miles from the station, he was starting to regret it. The storm howled louder, as if trying to push him back. But the footprints, they hadn't stopped. Adam squinted against the flurries, his flashlight barely cutting through the wall of white. Each step forward brought a new revelation. The tracks were erratic, as if whoever made them had been running, or stumbling. And then he saw it. A figure barely visible through the storm, standing motionless on the tracks. "Hey!" Adam called again, his voice trembling. "What are you doing out here?" The figure didn't move. Adam approached cautiously, his boots crunching against the snow-covered tracks. The closer he got, the more his unease grew. The figure was dressed in tattered clothes, their back turned to him. "Are you okay?" Adam asked, his breath visible in the freezing air. He reached out, hesitant. The figure turned abruptly. Adam stumbled back, his flashlight falling from his hands. The face was wrong, too pale, with eyes that seemed too dark and empty. The figure's lips moved, but no sound came out. Instead, the storm seemed to intensify, the wind carrying a faint, ghostly whisper. "Help me!" The voice wasn't loud, but it pierced through the storm, clear and haunting. Adam's instincts screamed at him to run, but his legs refused to obey. What happened to you?" he managed to stammer. The figure pointed down the tracks, their bony hand trembling. Adam followed their gaze and froze. The snow parted momentarily, revealing the twisted wreckage of a train. It lay on its side, half buried in snow, its windows shattered, its metal frame warped. Smoke, or perhaps steam, rose faintly from its remains. "That's impossible," Adam whispered. He had walked this stretch of tracks 100 times. There hadn't been a crash. Not recently. Not ever. The figure stepped closer, their movements jerky, unnatural. Adam backed away, his heart hammering in his chest. "Stay back!" he shouted. The whispers grew louder, surrounding him, filling his head. They weren't coming from the storm anymore. They were coming from the wreck. Driven by a mix of fear and morbid curiosity, Adam found himself moving toward the train. His flashlight beam flickered, as if struggling against some unseen force. The first body he saw was that of a young woman, her face frozen in an expression of terror. Her hand clutched a child's stuffed animal, now soaked and frozen. Adam's stomach churned, but he couldn't look away. More figures emerged as he approached, passengers standing silently by the wreck, their eyes hollow. They didn't speak, but their presence was suffocating. "Why are you still here?" Adam whispered, tears freezing on his cheeks. "What do you want from me?" The whispers stopped. A single voice answered, clear and chilling. "Justice." Adam turned to see the first figure again, now standing inches from him. Their face had changed. It was no longer empty, but filled with rage and sorrow. I don't understand," Adam stammered. The figure pointed at his flashlight, which had landed near the wreck. The beam illuminated a rusted plaque partially buried in the snow. Adam knelt, brushing it off with trembling hands. The words etched into the metal made his blood run colder than the storm. This train derailed January 4th, 1985. All 53 passengers and crew were lost. Cause: sabotage. Sabotage. Adam's breath caught as the whispers returned, louder now, angrier. The figures began to close in, their hands reaching for him, their eyes filled with accusations. "No, it wasn't me," he shouted, scrambling back. But the voices didn't stop. "You knew," they hissed. "You did nothing." Memories he had long buried surfaced unbidden. His grandfather, a station master in the 80s, had once drunkenly confessed to turning a blind eye to something, a tampered switch, a bribe too tempting to refuse. Adam had dismissed it as ramblings, refusing to believe it could be true. But now, as the ghosts of the past closed in, he realized the truth. His family's silence had condemned these people. The storms surged, the wind shrieking like 1,000 voices. Adam fell to his knees, sobbing. "I'm sorry. I didn't know. I didn't." The wind suddenly stopped. The figures vanished, leaving Adam alone in the eerie quiet. The wreck was gone, the tracks pristine beneath the fresh snow. But the voices lingered in his mind, a final warning. "Remember us, or we'll make sure no one forgets." The storm resumed, covering the tracks in a new layer of white. Adam staggered back toward the station, his legs weak, his soul heavier than ever. The past had spoken, and it would not be silenced again. The blizzard had come out of nowhere. Emma sat by the fireplace, staring out the frosted window as the storm raged outside. The wind howled like a living thing, shaking the old farmhouse to its foundations. The snow was relentless, covering everything in a suffocating white. She adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, the shadows from the flickering fire dancing on the walls of her grandparents' living room. Her grandparents were upstairs, likely fast asleep. They had warned her earlier, as they always did, to stay inside during storms like this. "Don't answer the door and don't listen to anything you hear outside," her grandmother had said, her voice trembling in a way that Emma thought was unusual. Emma had laughed it off at the time. "Who's going to come out in weather like this?" she had joked. But now, as the storm reached its peak, the emptiness of the countryside seemed unnervingly vast. The first voice came just past midnight. "Emma." It was faint, barely audible over the wind, but distinct enough to make her freeze. She turned her head toward the window, her heart pounding. "Emma." The voice came again, a little louder this time. She stood up, her eyes scanning the dark beyond the glass. The snow fell thick and fast, but she saw no one. Grabbing the flashlight from the mantel, she clicked it on and shone it out the window. The beam illuminated nothing but a swirling wall of white. "Hello," she called, her voice shaking slightly. No response. She sat back down, convincing herself it was just the wind. Maybe her ears were playing tricks on her. She pulled the blanket tighter and tried to focus on the crackling fire. "Emma, please help me," the voice called again. Her blood ran cold. This time it was closer, more desperate. It sounded like her younger brother, Jake, even though she knew that wasn't possible. Jake was miles away, safe at home. She stood and moved cautiously toward the window. "Jake," she called, her breath fogging up the glass. "Emma," the voice pleaded, "I'm lost. Let me in." The wind shifted, and for a moment she thought she saw a figure standing in the snow. She squinted, pressing her face closer to the glass, but the figure was gone before she could confirm it was ever there. Her heart pounded as her grandmother's warning replayed in her mind. "Don't listen to anything you hear outside." The voice came again, louder this time, almost angry. "Emma, I need you. Open the door." She stumbled back from the window, her hands shaking. It wasn't Jake. It couldn't be. She knew it, but the voice was so perfect, so exact, it made her doubt herself. The doorknob rattled. Emma froze, her eyes locking on the front door. The sound was soft at first, but then came the unmistakable pounding of fists against the wood. "Emma, please, I'm freezing," the voice begged, still sounding like Jake. But there was something wrong with it now. It was too sharp, too mechanical, as if it were a recording. She backed away, grabbing the poker from the fireplace. The pounding stopped, replaced by silence. And then the voice changed. "Emma, it's Mom. Open the door, sweetheart." Her heart twisted painfully. The voice was perfect, down to the slight tremor her mother got when she was worried. But her mother wasn't here. She was 3 states away. Tears stung her eyes as she gripped the poker tighter. "You're not my mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Don't be silly, honey. It's so cold out here. Please, let me in." The voice was insistent now, calm but commanding. She stepped back farther, her legs shaking. The window to her left suddenly rattled violently, as if something was slamming against it. She jumped, spinning to face it. "Emma, it's your dad. Open the door." She couldn't breathe. The voices were relentless now, coming from every side of the house. Her friends, her family, they all called to her, their pleas overlapping in a cacophony of desperation. Her legs buckled and she collapsed onto the floor, covering her ears. "You're not real," she whispered to herself over and over. The voices fell silent all at once. The sudden quiet was deafening. Emma slowly lowered her hands, her ears straining to hear anything beyond the crackle of the fire. And then she heard it. Footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, crunching through the snow outside the front door. The knob turned again, this time with a slow, calculated twist. "Emma," the voice called, low and guttural now. It didn't sound like anyone she knew anymore. "Let me in." The footsteps moved around the house, crunching beneath the windows. She scrambled to her feet, clutching the poker, her eyes darting to every corner of the room. The back door slammed open. Emma screamed, spinning toward the sound. Snow swirled into the kitchen, the door swinging wildly on its hinges. A shadow stood in the doorway, tall and twisted, its limbs impossibly long. It didn't speak now, it didn't need to. Emma ran for the stairs, her feet slipping on the wooden floor. She could hear it behind her, the wet slap of its feet as it crossed the threshold. She reached the second floor, slamming her grandparents' bedroom door shut behind her. "Grandma! Grandpa!" she cried, but the room was empty. The bed was neatly made, their belongings untouched. The footsteps stopped outside the door. "Emma," the voice whispered, soft and mocking. The doorknob turned slowly. She backed away, her heart hammering, the poker shaking in her grip. The door creaked open, revealing nothing but darkness beyond. The last thing she saw before the room was consumed by the storm was a single skeletal hand reaching for her. And then, silence. If you want to hear the chilling story of 9 hikers who mysteriously vanished, only to have their bodies discovered in the freezing snow, click here.